Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Midwest Medium Podcast. I am your host, June Hessler, and today is extra exciting because if you've listened to the podcast lately, we have not had a guest. And so today we have a guest. So I'm excited to get into it and share my guest with you today. By the way, if you are watching this on YouTube, that was my cat coming in. My door just opened by itself. I promise you it was not paranormal. My cat Eugene is in here. So if you're on YouTube, you can see him. This is Eugene. Say hi, Eugene. So he likes to do that. And sometimes when I'm reading for people, it freaks them out. And I have to remind myself to tell people it's just the cat. So anyway, that's what happened. If you're not watching on YouTube, you should go over there and check it out because it is kind of freaky if you don't know what's happening. Uh, so okay, Eugene's here. He's probably going to talk. He loves to talk. I've never met a cat who loves to talk as much as this guy does. Okay, today we have a guest. But before we get into my interview with Tony, you may have seen on my social media recently that I have surgery coming up very, very soon. I am having a hysterectomy. I have decided um, to share it, which is kind of weird because I'm private. But I think I know it's going to help people. I've actually already received a couple messages from some people saying that they appreciate my sharing it. So I'm going to keep doing that, and I'm not going to worry about what some people might think. I'm going to just do what feels like the right thing to do. So that's happening in a couple of days. Some people have been reaching out asking for readings with me at some point this summer. And I'm very grateful to you. Please know that I am pushing readings out right now because I am prioritizing my recovery. This was my last weekend doing readings right now. Today is June 22nd, and I am now preparing for surgery, which if you've ever had major surgery, hysterectomy is a major surgery. You know that you want to make sure all your ducks are in a row, or at least that's how I feel. I need to make sure that my house is clean, my laundry's done, groceries are in the house, bunch of different things. And actually, I'm not taking all the credit for it because my husband has been extremely helpful. So, but today it's my turn. I have some cleaning to do. I got laundry to do. And tomorrow I have church. And tomorrow I'll probably do last minute grocery shopping. And then Monday comes and it's the work week. I got my regular full-time job and then I have surgery. So a lot happening over the next few days. So about readings, I am pushing those out towards end of July. Um, recovery for hysterectomy is 8 weeks. Um, I would very much like to be able to give people readings end of July. So that'll give me about 4 weeks of recovery. So that is what is happening, you guys. Today, I have a very special guest, Tony Szabelski. He is a haunted tour guide with American Ghost Walks in Chicago. He is a super nice guy. So let me get into you guys, whenever I do interviews, I have these notes that I write up for myself. So I make sure I know what I'm talking about and I make sure I'm not forgetting any questions that I have. So what I have written up is a little biography about Tony. Tony is a longtime Chicago area paranormal investigator and haunted tour guide with American Ghost Walks, which I just said. In 2021, I had the pleasure of taking his tour and it was wonderful. Even my daughter, who was 14 at the time, 13, 14, I think she was 14, she loved it too. It was a lot of fun. Tony is extremely knowledgeable about Chicago's history and how it ties in with countless paranormal encounters reported around town. Tony has made a number of television appearances including my ghost story on the Biography channel and on Fox News. And he was also a guest on my friend Carol's podcast, Real Ghost Stories Online. So you can search that. You can find Tony there. He was on with her, I think it was last year. And actually, I didn't know he was going to be on there. And I was listening to the podcast one day, and all of a sudden there's Tony. And I was like, hey, I met that guy. He was my tour guide in Chicago. So we have him coming up next, and I cannot wait to have this conversation. Hi, Tony. Thanks for joining me today. I appreciate your time and your willingness to come on the podcast.
You're very welcome. My
So,
pleasure. Mm.
my pleasure. I'm so excited to talk
Yeah.
to you because my daughter and I, as I was telling you earlier, we took your tour in October of 2021.
Mhm.
And so, we'll definitely get into that. But first, I wanted to ask you, how did you become so interested in the paranormal? My understanding is that it first started when your dad passed away.
Right. Yeah. And I was only 14 years old. I was at his wake. He was laid out in his casket. I was up there where he was laid out. It was just me and him up there at the time. And I just kind of thought in my head, if he can give me some sort of sign that, he's okay, I wouldn't worry about him. And in that moment that I thought that, the lights in the funeral parlor went off and they came right back on. So I was like, whoa, okay. I took that as my sign. I ran outside to see if maybe like a storm was coming, but it was a calm night. There was
Yeah.
hardly any wind.
So you really recognized it in the moment for
Hmm.
it to be what it was, which was a sign from your
Right.
father that he was
Yeah.
okay.
Hmm.
So so that's
I,
what really got you interested in like spirit communication, paranormal side of
right.
things.
Yeah. I also think, and I didn't realize it at the time, and even it took me a while to realize it, he was probably trying to set me on this path, even,
Oh.
back then.
That's a really good point. Yeah, because had that not happened, we might not be talking today.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah. And you've really, I know, have built a name for yourself with American Ghost Walks and being the tour guide. That's so interesting. So,
Mhm.
did you continue to have these sorts of experiences as you grew up, or what, or was that
No,
isolated?
not really. There were a few strange things. I grew up in the Old Town neighborhood of Chicago, which is one of the oldest neighborhoods, and a lot of the houses are built right after the Great Chicago Fire. And there were a few strange things that would happen, like, wake up in the middle of the night hearing some strange noises. I remember being actually my cousins, I'm going to be seeing them in a couple hours. They're over at my sister's house from Arizona, but when they used to live in Chicago, uh, used to spend the night at one of their houses right near Wrigley Field, right near the Cubs Park.
Oh,
And
sure.
I swear that in the middle of the night, you'd hear the sounds of like somebody washing dishes and putting dishes away in the cabinet and things like that. So it's just little things. Um, Even altogether, my whole life, I haven't had a ton of paranormal experiences, just a few here and there. But
Enough to really kick off your career.
right, but always interested in, the history and growing up in Old Town, not far from Lincoln Park, I would hear the stories about it being an old cemetery, but I never fully
Yeah.
knew them until later.
Right. Right. Okay. So that's interesting how just those few encounters really set you on a path. But I
Right.
also think, like you had mentioned, I don't think a person really needs to have these sorts of experiences to be interested in
Yeah.
the
Mm-mm.
subject matter. But I think they often will go hand in hand. But
Right.
you can definitely be interested in it without having your whole life surrounded by paranormal interaction.
Right. Yeah. Definitely.
So when my daughter and I took the tour with you, she and I, we just went on a mother-daughter trip to Chicago. It
Mhm.
was her 14th birthday. And our meeting spot with you was right outside the Chicago History Museum.
Right.
And that is where you told us about the Great Fire. I think it was 1871.
Right.
And the apparent need to relocate many buried bodies at some point after the fire. And when we were outside the Chicago History Museum, You also mentioned that when the museum was built, the construction workers found caskets. So tell us more about what happened with the fire needing to move grave
Mhm.
sites. Did they really move the graves that they said that they moved? And then fast forward to the construction workers finding a bit of a gruesome sight.
Sure. Yeah, the Chicago City Cemetery, which occupies the land where, or would have occupied the land where Lincoln Park and the Lincoln Park Zoo are, actually opened in 1843. The closure of a couple of smaller cemeteries, one about where the Chicago Water Tower building is along the Magnificent Mile, and
Oh,
another one where the McCormick Place is over on the South Loop area. Uh, and the main problem they closed City Cemetery was, and they were planning on closing it before the Great Chicago Fire, is the fact that it was built on marshland close to the shore of Lake Michigan.
mhm,
And whenever the high tide would come in off the lake, the caskets buried on this marshland were washing ashore, and the bodies were getting into the lake, contaminating the drinking water, spreading diseases like cholera.
mhm.
Now, even though a doctor does kind of outline all this for the city council in about 1859, and they agree with him that really we shouldn't be burying bodies out at this old cemetery. Um, they still continued to do it up until about the mid 1860s. And what changes the city's mind about keeping that as a cemetery is the fact that a lot of people are starting to move to that part of town. And that was described in newspapers as an ugly, smelly eyesore of an
Oh,
area.
sure.
Caskets washing ashore, body parts like all over the place. So they decided to shut it down somewhere about the mid 1860s. And they
Okay.
bring in just a small crew of men, uh, roughly about 10, to start moving about 25 to 30,000 bodies that were buried there. And then the Great Chicago Fire hit and went right through that land,
Mhm,
destroying whatever headstones, especially a lot of the early ones that were wooden headstones, and burning up all records of the cemetery. So after that, they pretty much gave up. Money was lost on the project because it had to be reallocated to rebuilding the city. And it kind of, at that point, was only if a family had money that would privately pay to have their loved ones moved. The rest were pretty much just left there and told that, well, yeah, we moved them to the cemetery, the new cemeteries that they had already opened up. Um, and it wasn't the History Museum; it was the parking lot for the History Museum, which is across the street
got it.
on Val and Clark Street. That they built additional parking for the History Museum in 1998, where they dug up the remains of 81 bodies.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so that
Wow.
we're talking 26 years ago.
Yeah, not that long ago, really. And it sounds
Right.
like an impossible task to ask 18 or to ask 10 men to move
Yeah.
tens of thousands of bodies
Yeah.
in the 1800s. I mean, it
Right.
just
Yeah. With no modern digging equipment.
right. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I remember when you told us that and my jaw just kind of actually dropped because it was
Right.
information I had never heard before and it seemed like an
Mhm.
impossible task. And of course, oh yeah, we moved your family because you think how would they ever know otherwise? Although
Right.
it's
Exactly.
immoral, but other than
Mhm.
that, oh wow, that's interesting. So when we were on your tour, we moved from that site and then we moved to, I'm a little fuzzy on the details, but I remember we went into a baseball field area
Right.
that
Mhm.
had that seemed to have some mounds and some dips in
Right.
the grassy part of where we were walking. And if I remember correctly, you had explained that that was very likely an area that had unmarked graves.
Yes. Actually, there is a big plaque there, as there are three other plaques in the park that say "The Hidden Truths of Chicago." Uh, professor
Oh,
from
sure.
North Professor from Northwestern University, Pamela Banos, in the year 2008 got the right to put these plaques throughout the park to tell the story about it being an old cemetery. And the plaque that's in front of the baseball fields says that that was the city cemetery Potter's Field, a graveyard for poor um, unmarked graves. The plaque actually says right on it that there were probably about 15,000 bodies buried there in unmarked
Wow.
graves. And if they didn't move the ones that were marked,
Right.
they didn't move the graves that weren't marked. And
Exactly.
yeah, there were about 4,000 Civil War soldiers, Southern Confederate soldiers that died at a prisoner of war camp that was located on Chicago's South Side, called
Okay.
Camp Douglas, that were also buried in the Potter's Field. And it is believed all those bodies are still under there somewhere.
Well, I have to say, it's been a few years, but when we went through on your tour, and I know it was nighttime, but my daughter and I, we felt very safe.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
there was a bit of an eeriness
Hmm.
to that area that I still remember to this day. So I would completely believe that there's still unmarked graves there, no question.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And then, like you mentioned, there are lots of dips and little mounds, which
Mhm.
is believed remnants of it being an old cemetery.
Yeah. Now, when we were in that area, you brought a bunch of EMF
Mhm.
meters that you let us use, which was really fun. I didn't expect that. And
Right.
so you allowed the group to kind of venture off for maybe 5, 10 minutes on their own
Mhm.
and see if they could pick up any paranormal activity. Now, when you do that with your groups, are there any experiences that happen that have stood out that you could share? Any memories that you have that were like, oh, wow, that was definitely something paranormal?
Well, yeah, there was with those meters, sometimes we'd ask like direct questions. People would be holding these meters in their hands. I remember one time we asked if you were in the war, if there's a spirit here with us, were you in the Civil War? And the lights on the meters all went up and then they went back down. And then we asked, were you from the South? And it went back up again.
Hmm.
Um, so things like that have definitely happened there. And occasionally people do get some interesting pictures over in that area.
Sure.
Um, Probably was about 4 or 5 years ago that somebody got looked like some orbs moving between the trees right there near those softball fields.
Oh, interesting. Okay. It's a really pretty area.
It
And
is, yeah.
I would I was a little worried like, oh, a nighttime tour through Chicago, but we were definitely safe with you and we went to really
Yeah.
interesting places. So, but yeah, that's a little eerie area, I have to
Yeah.
say.
Well, Lincoln Park is one of the safest areas in the city.
True.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, and that's where we spent most of our time.
Right. Yeah.
Now, during the tour, you mentioned Congress Plaza Hotel.
Yes.
That is where my daughter and I stayed. I specifically looked for a hotel that had a reputation of potentially being
Mhm.
haunted,
Yeah.
and it just so happened to be um kind of like on Main Street, I guess you could say, of Chicago, and it just happened to be a less expensive nightly rate than all the other hotels in Chicago. So that's where we stayed.
Hmm.
Um and I know that you've been there, I'm sure many, many
Oh, yeah.
times.
Yeah.
We stayed there. I think we were there 4 nights. It was a long weekend we stayed. And that place is creepy.
Hmm.
So for anyone listening or watching on YouTube, if you've seen The Shining, we definitely had Shining vibes. We watched the
Yeah.
movie, I think maybe 2 or 3 weeks before we went on our trip. And we stayed on we were in the North Tower, seventh floor. Um, I believe I believe we were in 721 or 726. I can't remember, but I'd have to look back. Um,
Hmm.
but it was creepy. And so we first got there, we checked in, we went upstairs, and then we were hungry. It was around, I think, 7, 8 o'clock at night. And we just came straight from the airport. So we went down to the bar restaurant in the
Hmm.
hotel. And I remember we were sitting, my daughter and I were sitting right up at the bar. We weren't at a table, we were just right up at the bar. And I remember looking down and I had the menu in front of me. And we were, if you remember, Tony, how the bar is
Mhm.
situated, there behind the bar, there is an opening that probably goes into the kitchen or the back room or
Yeah.
whatever's back there. I don't know. So we're sitting right across from that, and I'm looking at the menu, and in my peripheral, I see a man um in a dark brown suit.
Hmm.
And I only could really see from like probably the belly button down because my head was down. And I didn't think too much of it. This was before I knew I was a medium and I didn't want to freak out my daughter. So I just, tried to focus on the menu at hand and trying to figure out what we were going to order. But I did see just, it was like a dark brown suit. I don't know who would wear that working in a kitchen or at a bar, but I suppose it's possible. But when I looked up, he was gone. So I know that it's rumored the Congress Plaza Hotel has potentially some ties to Al Capone. I'm not saying I saw Al Capone, but I definitely saw something that I can't explain. Um, so we proceeded with our meal and then we decided to go. It must be the South Tower. We went up to, is it 421, 411,
Four
421?
four one 441.
441. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we went up there. That was creepy too. You can feel when you walk through the hallways. I mean, the whole place is just very eerie. But we specifically went to 441 because I had read um all the paranormal activity that supposedly takes place in that room. And we were up there, just my daughter and I, and she immediately got a really bad stomach ache and wanted to go back to the room and lie down. So that was just our first hour at the plaza, the
Mhm.
Congress Plaza Hotel.
Yeah. Oh, I definitely believe it. Mm. And I think since you took the tour in 2021, all our bus tours were meeting at the History Museum then. We used to meet at the hotel, but during COVID, they didn't want us to do that anymore. But we have moved back our bus tours to meeting at the Congress Hotel, like
Okay.
we have to give tonight. Also, I think since I had you on the tour, I've also done a YouTube video that's out there for the CBS News. It's through should be under the Chicago Hauntings American Ghost Walks Congress Plaza Hotel, where I talked on the news about the history of the hotel. And yeah, the hotel definitely has a very interesting history. Um, Built in anticipation of the World's Fair coming to Chicago in 1893, built as the Auditorium Annex Hotel. The North Tower is the oldest tower, the one that you stayed in. The Auditorium building is just directly across the street from it. That was the original hotel. With the anticipation of everybody coming to Chicago for the World's Fair, they built an annex to that hotel across the street. And suicides have been rampant in that hotel. There's been a lot of suicides in that hotel.
Yeah.
One of the spirits that people see, especially in the bar and in like the lobby area downstairs, is like a shadow figure. Now,
Okay.
you said he was wearing like a brown suit, and I don't know if the person, there's a guy they call the Shadow Man of the Congress. Um, we believe it's a Spanish American War veteran named Captain Louis Ostheim, who in 1900, before the hotel had even been, 10 years old, um, on the eve of this man's wedding, with no explanation, no note, everybody who saw him said he seemed to be in good spirits. He just took a gun to his head and pulled the trigger
Oh
and
my
committed
gosh.
suicide in his room. And they claim to have seen him as a shadow man throughout the hotel since then.
Hmm.
Um, Not only is he seen in those areas I mentioned, but he tends to turn up in people's closets in their room. People
Oh my
report
gosh.
people report the sound of like a raccoon or like a squirrel if it got in their closet making noises, and
Um,
they call security and they come and they find nothing there.
I'm so glad you did not tell me that while we were staying there.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Wow.
something being in your closet is the most common um, paranormal thing that's reported at that hotel.
Mm-hmm.
And then you mentioned Al Capone. There are stories that say Capone may have stayed in the hotel, but we haven't been able to verify those stories.
Sure.
Uh, but we do know for a fact that a few of his men throughout the years stayed in the hotel, including one of his most trusted uh, chief bookkeeper, a guy by the name of Jake Greasy Thumb Guzik.
Okay.
And there was two call after the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. There were two calls traced from the lobby of the Congress Hotel to Al Capone's estate in Miami
Oh,
that
mm-hmm.
morning. One call just before those guys were shot in the garage on Clark Street, and the next call directly after the time they believe they were shot. And many believe Jake Guzik is the one who called Al Capone from the lobby of
Sure.
the Congress Hotel.
Interesting. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of history there when um it almost, I mean, it's such a large hotel that it almost felt like it was empty
Hmm.
because there are just so many rooms. So my daughter and I, we just took it upon us to just tour the hotel ourselves. We
Yeah.
explored extensively. We went up to the 12th floor,
Mhm.
which I know is suspected to be very haunted.
Mhm.
We went into the gold room by ourselves. All the lights were off, and that was creepy.
Yeah.
But it was very cool, and I'm glad we did it. And then we actually had friends that were in Chicago at the same time, and they came over. I told my friend, you
Mhm.
have to come check this place out if your kids are interested in anything spooky. So they came over for about an hour. We explored, and we went to where room 666 used to
Mhm.
be. And you
Right.
can very clearly see the outline. They've
Mhm.
sealed it off. There's
Yeah.
wallpaper over where the door once was. You can
Right.
very clearly see the outline of it. And actually, Tony, when we were outside of the room, it was my friend and I, and then four kids. Um, we were outside the room. We were like talking about why the room was sealed off and trying to decide where to go next. And there was a woman that was staying in the room next to 666. She opened the door, she came out and she said, "Why are you here? What are you doing?" Like she was upset with us.
Hmm.
And we just said, we're just exploring the hotel. And it was so odd, Tony. I don't know if she was like trying to protect the sealed off room. I can't even tell you, like, explain why she was so upset with us that we were
Yeah.
there for maybe, honestly, no more than 2 minutes.
Hmm.
So it was just very strange. I wanted to tell you just something I wanted to tell you about. Um, it's a very unique place. So
Oh,
I
definitely.
would very much encourage anyone who's interested in staying in a place like that to check it out.
Mhm.
We also talked, my daughter and I, we talked with some security that worked there. We asked for some of their stories, and
Mhm.
they seemed, I think, comfortable enough to tell us a few different stories. But I wanted to ask you, can you tell us about the 12th floor and what supposedly
Oh,
happened all those years ago?
oh, definitely. Um, yeah, I get the Shining vibes up on the 12th floor,
Big
definitely.
time.
Um,
Yeah.
I mean, the 12th floor is very creepy. I, in comparison, how beautiful the lobby is, the 12th floor, I like to tell people, when you're in the lobby, you're in present times. You go up to the 12th floor, it's like almost being back in 1893. Um,
Yes.
because the lighting is very dim up there, carpet is worn, the baseboards are broken, uh, paint is chipping off the wall, wallpaper's falling from the walls. The doors don't match. There's brown doors on some rooms, white doors on others, and then you get
Yeah.
that narrower hallway. And there's also a couple of sealed off rooms up there that I can't really
Mm,
get any information from security for why those rooms are sealed off. But
yeah.
what they say happens up there. Not if one of the security guards you talked to was a guy named John, um, older guy, kind of heavy set,
Oh,
white
possibly.
hair.
Uh-huh.
He's worked there, 35 years or so. Usually working the overnight shift when, look, that's when the hotel goes down and a lot of things happen. Um, he John said he didn't really believe in ghosts in the beginning when he started working at that hotel, but he encountered this little boy spirit up on the 12th floor. Um, got several calls that people were saying that there's a boy running around up here making a lot of noise, the middle of the night. So he went up to see what was going on, and he said he didn't initially see anything, but then he sees this little boy standing down the far end of the hallway. He just kind of pointed at him and said, "Hey, you're not supposed to be up here running around. What are you doing?" And he said that
Yeah.
little boy just kind of grinned at him and totally faded away right before his eyes.
Oh my
We
gosh.
believe the little boy goes back to a murder suicide that happened at the hotel in 1939. A mother and her two sons um, came to Chicago from Czechoslovakia. They were Czech immigrants trying to establish residency in this country, um, since their country was being taken over by the Nazis.
Mhm.
And her husband, the boy's father, stays back in the old country to try to sell their house and business. And they are only here on a 6-month temporary visa. It's a 6 and a 4-year-old boy. And they stay in various locations throughout the city, eventually ending up at least what security tells me, room 1234,
Okay.
um, which, oddly enough, when this story actually took place in 1939, the 12th floor was actually the 13th floor. Um,
Oh,
they has since changed the floors. It was described to me how they did it is like where the one of the ballrooms is. They, instead of that just being one floor, they accounted it for being two floors, so the numbers would be
oh,
different. So now
uh-huh.
you'd be on the 12th floor instead of the 13th floor.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but by every account, the mother and the two sons spent a nice August afternoon together at the Lincoln Park Zoo. When they get back to the room, the mother opens the windows and pushes the two boys out, and then she jumps out right after them, in a murder suicide. The 6-year-old Carl Langer is the one believed haunting that 12th floor. His younger brother, Jan, who was
Oh,
4, they've never seen his ghost there. They believe the mother may have suffered a nervous breakdown because she
uh-huh.
lost contact with her husband, and she was fearful of them being sent back there with all that was going on, and she may have just thought the best thing to do was to end all their lives.
Oh my
Um,
gosh, that's awful.
yeah, we believe he's the little boy that's up there on that 12th floor. And
Mm-hmm.
the really even sadder part about it is shortly after that happens, the front desk receives a telegram from the father saying the family was granted residency in Canada. But unfortunately, they had to tell him, yeah, it's too late. Your
It's
family's
too
gone.
late. Oh
Hmm.
my gosh. You know, from what I remember being on the 12th floor, I remember feeling watched. I don't
Hmm.
even know if anyone else was up there staying in any of the rooms when we explored. It truly felt like we were the only people, the only living people that were on that floor at that time, but I definitely felt
Hmm.
watched. There were times when we were walking through and I kept looking behind us because I felt like we were being followed. It
Hmm.
was very interesting and a bit spooky. Now, with that hotel, it's my understanding that they no longer allow paranormal investigations. Is that still true?
Well, to the degree that we used to do them before,
Okay.
the previous owner of Chicago Hauntings, American Ghost Walks, Ursula, um, she used to actually, on some of our bus tours, we would add it on as like a little addition to like go through the hotel briefly at the end of the night,
Okay.
do a little investigation, and also, especially in the winter months when the hotel wasn't as crowded, she would rent out like a suite for us to
Hmm.
come with groups of people and spend the night there. That kind of stuff they've said no to. They're probably not going to stop you if you have a room in the hotel
Yeah.
and you want to walk around with a little ghost hunting equipment or something, and they might come up and question you, but they probably won't stop you. But they did stop us from doing like group investigations in the hotel.
I think
Um,
that's so unfortunate because and
mhm,
there's many places haunted, including hotels around America where they embrace it and it's part of
right.
their tourism, it's part
Hmm.
of helping um make money and keep the place up and
Right.
this
Yeah.
hotel really does need some sort of renovation. I
It
mean, at
does
least when we
definitely.
were there 3 years ago,
Mhm.
it's definitely falling apart. There's a lot of
Yeah.
repairs that need to be. So it's just too bad that they're not embracing it as much as they could and they could
Right.
make revenue
Yeah.
off of that. That's really too
Hmm.
bad.
Yeah. Unfortunately, but and maybe
And it's
eventually, if new
what's that?
people come in, and maybe eventually, if new people come in,
Yeah.
who will embrace that more, they'll allow us to come back and
I
do
hope
those.
they will. It's a beautiful hotel. I mean, I
It
feel like
is, yeah.
everyone should see it, whether or not you're into the
Mhm.
paranormal. It really is a beautiful structure.
Right, and just with such amazing history too.
Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah. And it's right across from is it called Bryant Park?
Grant Park.
Brant Park. It's right
Yeah.
across the street from there. It's a beautiful location. Now, moving on in
Hmm.
our tour, we also went to the St. Valentine Day Massacre site,
Hmm.
which of course the garage no longer exists. It's kind
Right.
of a small version of an open field with, I think, one or
Yeah.
two trees.
Hmm.
Can you tell the listeners the history on that and why it's considered to be a haunted area now?
Okay. Um, well, during Prohibition, gangsters made a ton of money. Um, some of them even rose to being like million and billionaires. Um, and everybody seems to know Al Capone, but there were so many other gangsters, not only in Chicago but throughout the country. And Capone mainly controlled the south side of the city. That was his
Mhm.
territory. Um, he has a huge rival gang, which was located on the north side, which were Lincoln Park and where that garage would have been. And they are using this little. They called it a trucking company, SMC Cartage Company. 2122 North Clark Street was the address. They're using this little garage as like their unofficial headquarters in the near the final days of Prohibition. Main reason why they used that garage is because it was owned by one of the gang members, Adam Heyer, and also just down the street from where the head of the Northside Gang at the time, Bugs Moran, was living in an apartment building, the Parkview Apartments, which are still there.
Mhm.
Um, and these gang wars really kind of hit ahead. The gangsters attempted to get along, have like peace treaties in place, and divide the city into territories, but it didn't really work for very long. They all start getting in each other's territories, which sparks off the decade-long beer and alcohol wars between the gangs. And it all really hits ahead on Valentine's morning in 1929, um, when 7 members of the Moran gang were hanging out. Well, six that we know were members of the Moran gang. The seventh man was a 29-year-old optometrist who,
Oh,
by most accounts, was not a gangster, but he just liked
sure.
hanging out with gangsters. Um, we're in this little garage at 10:30 in the morning, waiting for a shipment of whiskey coming from Canada, where it was still legal to produce. And allegedly, Capone sends at least 4 men to raid the meeting that morning. There could have been more, but at least 4. 2 of the men come dressed as Chicago policemen, and they come in a Chicago police car.
Mhm.
Um, 2 other men are wearing regular clothing, and a police car pulled up in front of the garage that morning. The 2 guys dressed as policemen got out, went in the front door. The other guys go around back, coming through the back door. Um, and the belief is that the men in the garage probably thought this was just going to be a liquor raid when they saw policemen come in there.
Sure.
Um, So when they lined them up against the back wall and had their hands up, they probably were not expecting that Tommy guns were going to be taken out and they were just going to be blown to pieces. And extremely cleverly executed, because they don't even find the men that were shot in that garage till about 3 hours later.
Mm-hmm.
And they, you would think, Tommy guns make a lot of noise. The garage, you were there. It's on a busy street in the middle of a neighborhood, 10:30 in the morning. Um, Witnesses did hear all the gunfire, but when they look out to see what's going on, what they see is two men dressed as policemen handcuffing two other men
Sure.
outside that garage and throwing them in the back seat of the police car, and then they jump in the front seat, and the police car just kind of drives off.
Nothing
Uh,
too suspicious.
Nothing too suspicious. It was just the original four men that went in there, and they came out with two guys handcuffed. So people thought, oh, whatever shooting might have happened there, I guess the police got the guys.
Yeah.
Um, and it was only the barking of a dog, which one of the gangsters, John May's German Shepherd Highball, would not stop barking all afternoon. They didn't shoot Highball; they left him alone. But it was that barking that a lady who owned the building next door, when she comes home a few hours later, she's wondering why this dog is making all this noise and nobody's comforting the poor dog. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, her and a neighbor go into the garage to see what's going on, and that's when they realize that there's all those dead men in there. Um,
Oh my gosh.
mm, and I think the site's been haunted ever since then. I
Yeah.
mean, you think about unavenged murders and reasons why a spirit might stay in that location, because
Mm-hmm.
no one has ever been charged with killing them. Uh,
Oh, sure. So
Capone,
that, yeah.
I mean, Capone and some men were suspected, but they were never charged. Um, Also, the belief that in the paranormal, that Catholics, I'm Catholic, uh, they're taught growing up that if you're not a good person in life, what's going to happen to you in death is you're going to go down to hell and burn. So a lot of these gangsters were Catholic, and the belief is that maybe instead of facing that type of judgment, they tend to stay where they died, so they could still be haunting that site.
Absolutely. Yeah. Even though the garage is gone,
Hmm.
um, they can still absolutely, if they're tied to the land, yeah,
Right.
they're not going anywhere.
Hmm.
So that is the site where we ended our tour. And I remember at that point you gave us dowsing rods, or
Hmm.
also known as witching rods. And so,
Right.
like you did with the EMF meters at the baseball sites, you
Hmm.
allowed us to use the dowsing rods. And you gave us some time with that. My daughter and I were asking questions, and I had never used them before, but you
Hmm.
clearly gave us great instructions. They're very easy to use. And so I was holding them, trying to keep my hands as still as possible, and we're asking yes and no questions. If it's yes, do this. If it's no, do that.
Hmm.
And we were receiving intelligent responses
Hmm.
in
Yeah.
return. Who we were communicating with, of course, I don't know. We only did it for maybe 5 minutes.
Right.
Um, but it was really interesting. And I have to say, Tony, my daughter, for being 14, I personally would say that it's a great tour that parents can bring their teenage children on, as long as
Hmm.
the teenage child can handle an aspect of being a little bit spooky and a little, um, being out at night and hearing these kinds of stories. But
Hmm.
my daughter has always enjoyed history. And then when we went on your tour, all it did was spike her interest in history and how it ties in with the paranormal. So I wanted to
Oh
thank you for
yeah.
that, because
Yeah. Oh sure.
you're very you're very knowledgeable about the subject matter, and you give really great tours. I mean, truly, it's obviously a passion that you have, and
Hmm.
that comes
Yeah.
forward in your tour. So I just
Thank you.
wanted to thank you as a mom to a teenage girl.
Hmm.
Um, it was a lot of fun. And actually, one other thing I wanted to tell you about the
Hmm.
Congress, it was I cannot remember if it was the night of the tour or if it was the next night. But in the middle of the night, my daughter we have a two bed room, just standard room.
Mhm.
And in the middle of the night, I woke up and there were two females standing at the end of my bed. And they were talking about my daughter and I. I don't remember what they said.
Yeah.
I just remember they were talking about us. And I only could see them as like shadow figures. And I just knew that they were
Mhm.
female. One was taller, one was shorter. And of course, at that time, I'm in an altered state. I felt calm. I wasn't scared. And
Uh-huh.
I roll over and fall back asleep. I wish I could remember if it was the night of the tour or if it was the next night. I don't know if some people followed us from the tour. I don't know
Mhm.
if it was deceased people that we know personally. My grandmother had just passed away the week before. I don't know if it was spirits that are in the Congress Hotel. I'm not sure. Um, but it was definitely an interesting experience
Right.
at the
Yeah, that's
Congress.
fascinating, definitely. Mm.
Yeah. So, in all of your experiences, Tony, and all of the stories that you've heard, I'm sure you've heard a lot of stories from people like
Mhm.
us that come to town and take your tour. Do
Yeah.
you have a favorite paranormal story, either from Chicago, somewhere else, either a story that someone's told you or something that you've experienced on your own?
Probably things that I've experienced on my own.
Yeah.
Um, and one of them, well, a couple of them would actually be at the Congress Hotel.
Okay.
Um, with when we used to going back to the days when we used to do the investigations there more regularly.
Hmm.
Uh, it was like February, I want to say, of maybe 2018 or 2019. We had a group of people doing an investigation at the hotel. I had a friend of mine, this guy named Jason, who he worked for the previous owner of the company, Chicago Hauntings. Um, and he was assisting me with the investigation. We spent the night in the suite. The night it was just, these all happened in the same night. Um, the south tower of the hotel was closed off at this point, it being February and not as many tourists visit Chicago in the winter, especially
Sure.
after the holidays. So weren't using the south tower. But so we were staying in a room in the north tower. As soon as me and him got in the room, we walked in the room. We didn't turn the lights on ourselves because it was still daylight outside. As we put our backpacks and stuff down on the bed, the lights in the room went on.
Oh
He
boy.
looked over at me and he says, "Did you turn the lights on?" I said, "I'm standing right across from you. My hands are right by my side. The light is by the door that we already
Yeah.
passed and went in."
Yeah.
Uh, so that kind of started the night out. And then as we were investigating, you know what a doppelganger is. It's like seeing your own double.
Correct.
Um, we were heading from the 12th floor in the North Tower over to room 441.
Hmm.
We're gonna, I think, I don't, there was a couple of nights security when that part of the building was closed off. It actually let us in that room. I don't remember if this was one of those nights or not, but we were going
Sure.
to 441 anyways, even if we did something just in the hallway. And Jason was walking ahead of the group, and there were maybe about 7 or 8 of us. My daughter was with me. She was on my right side. And to get to 441, you just go straight down the 400 wing hallway through the doors. And then you turn to the right, and it's another set of doors that you go through, and it's the first room.
Yep.
But as we're going down this darkened 400 wing hallway, Jason kind of very abruptly turned to the right. And I thought, wonder why he went that way instead of straight down the hallway to where the room is. And I stopped the group and I said, let me go see where he went. And I'm calling his name, looking for him. He's not there. So I get back to the group and I'm like, well, let's just go to the room. He'll find us. He knows
Yeah.
this hotel well enough. And that room 441 is once you open the hallway door, it's the first room to your right.
Yes.
And we'll open the door, and there's Jason standing with his hands on his hips looking at us. And he's like, I thought you guys were right behind me. What took you so long to get here? And I'm like, no, that shouldn't be
Oh,
the question.
weird.
That should be where did you go? Because we went to see where you went. And he insists to this day that he did not go anything other than straight down that hallway. Mm.
So how did your group of people react when that happened?
Well, yeah, they saw it and they thought the same thing, that they saw something go that way in a
Yeah.
closed off portion of the hotel. Um, but
Hmm.
we don't know. We don't know what it was. Mm. And
Unexplained.
also, not only this was the same night, but also another time when we were investigating there, same guy, Jason, we were using the ghost box, a spirit box that scans the radio frequencies in a little
Hmm.
linen closet up on the 12th floor, that just happened to be open that night. So we just kind of wandered in there. Um, Several people saw what looked like a shadow along the wall.
Okay.
And with the person, this wasn't, I have a ghost box too, but this wasn't mine. A person in the group brought it and they called it a portal because it was a little bit different type of ghost box. And we had that going when people saw this shadow and we were asking questions. And whatever this shadow entity was, it started to say some not so nice things to us, like swearing at us. And
Hmm.
then Jason said, I don't appreciate you talking to us like that. I don't like you bullying us. And we all very clearly heard come through that ghost box, Jason, regret it. Like,
Oh my
okay,
gosh.
all right, well, um, didn't really think a lot of it in the moment. We kind of
Yeah.
finished up the session and then we decided we were going to go downstairs to the restrooms, take a little break. And as we got in the elevator to go downstairs, we actually got stuck in the elevator for about 20 minutes. We had to have
Oh,
security come and get us out. So I was
that
like,
is not a hotel that I
yeah.
would want to get stuck in.
Hmm. So I was like, yeah,
Oh,
Jason, you regretted it and you took the whole group with you.
oh
Mm.
my gosh. Now, it just occurred to me, we've been talking about 441, but we haven't talked about why that is such a highly haunted room. Can you give us a little background on that room?
Well, what they say, it's the room that gets more calls to the front desk about paranormal activity than any other room. And what people report is seeing what you had described, a woman standing at like the foot of their bed. Um,
Okay.
Now you said you heard like they were talking in your I don't think this woman has ever been reported saying anything. She just kind of
Okay.
stands there, sometimes shakes on the bed or pulls the covers.
Ugh.
Security has told me they've seen her coming in and out of the restroom that's in there too.
Okay.
Um, we don't know her identity. Some speculate she could be the mother from the 12th floor,
Okay.
the one that pushed the two boys out and then jumped also. And it's possible. Maybe for some reason she's hanging out on the other side of the hotel. But yeah,
Yeah.
that is the most reported thing there. Even in the hallway, people have had some experiences seeing like shadow figures in the hallway outside that room.
When we were only outside of the room, I didn't know if anyone was staying in there. We were
Mhm,
outside the room maybe 3 or 4 minutes, and it was my daughter and I both reported to each other. We both felt very unwelcome. We
mhm,
felt unwanted, and it was very heavy, dense energy. And then my daughter got that stomach ache, and so we left.
mhm.
Yeah, it was very odd.
Yeah, I remember another time we were doing an investigation there. Another friend of mine, this guy Tim, was using a voice recorder, and he had asked into that recorder if the spirits are okay that were there. And now we didn't
Uh-huh.
hear any responses in live time, but when he played the recorder back, and we actually did it, he played it back a few minutes later. There's a response right after that that says "run."
No.
Yeah, hmm,
Oh my gosh.
yeah,
That place, I'm telling you, I've stayed at a lot of hotels in my
hmm,
life, and I've stayed at other supposedly haunted hotels, and I've had different experiences that I would agree they're haunted. But the Congress Plaza Hotel, I think, is a whole different level of haunting. So
oh
that's why I'm so disappointed that they're not embracing it
yeah,
and sharing it with more people. But I would, anyone who's listening, I would say if this is of interest to you, go there and
hmm.
check it out because it's very unique. It's a unique stay, I
It
would
is.
say.
It definitely is.
Yeah. Well, Tony, from my perspective, you seem very passionate about everything we just talked about, and you give fantastic tours. Like, I cannot emphasize that enough. Do you still feel like you're still learning things and do you still, I mean, I think you seem so engaged in the subject matter. You don't get I don't think you get bored, do you? Do you get
No,
bored of
I
it yet?
don't. No, I don't, even though I've given a lot of the same tours over and over again.
Yeah,
And I do appreciate what you said. Thank you. Um, yes, I definitely still do learn things. Also, that that's different people on the tours every
sure.
night. But sometimes I am giving tours close to nightly. I have tonight will be my fifth tour this week, I think.
Oh
Um,
wow. Yeah,
and
they keep you busy.
I got one tomorrow night too. Yeah, sometimes it is 7 nights a week. Sometimes there's maybe a night or two off per week, depending
Sure.
on how people sign up. Uh, but yeah, it's always different people on the tour. You get different reactions. People ask different questions. Like
Yeah.
depending on sometimes where people are from. I'd always try to ask people where they're from because some might say they're from Las Vegas, and I'll say, well, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre wall where the guys were shot is in Vegas
Yes,
right
it
now.
is.
That's where it's at the Mobsters Museum in
Yeah.
Vegas. So things like that, or they might say, they're from Brooklyn, New York, and I'd be like, well, that's where Al Capone was from too. That's where he started working with the mafia, um,
Yeah.
and in whatever other stories that might connect in or tie in. Um, to the tour that I'm giving. And I also learned again with the Valentine's Massacre, I think a story that I didn't know at the time you would have been taking the tour, that there is actually a confession in the FBI files of told to J. Edgar Hoover, who was the founder of the FBI
Uh-huh.
in 1935, by a man named Byron Bolton, who was believed to be a lookout across the street in one of the apartment buildings.
Oh, oh wow.
He gets arrested in a raid in Chicago in 1935 as they're looking for a guy named Doc Barker, who was part of the Barker Carpus gang, which had kidnapped the president of one of the brewing companies. Um, the Barker gang stories say that the Barker gang was run by the mother of the three Barker boys, Ma Barker, and this guy Byron Bolton uh, confessed to being a lookout to J. Edgar Hoover under pressure years later. And not only did he say that he was working for Al Capone that day as a lookout, he also told Mr. Hoover the names of the four men that entered that garage and did the shooting. Gave him first and last names and told him
Uh-huh.
where you could find the Tommy guns that were used. But many authorities on the mafia and that incident believe, because Al Capone was already in prison for tax evasion, and that a couple of the other names he mentioned either were dead or in prison also, the story pretty much didn't go too far beyond that. They kind of half-heartedly looked into things, and that was it. But it is in the FBI files.
Wow, that's so interesting.
Hmm.
So eventually at some point it sounds like someone tried to do the right thing.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. Wow. Now Tony, I know that you do your tours in Chicago. As
Hmm.
I recall, you would also do some tours outside of Chicago. Are you still doing that, or do you primarily focus on Chicago?
Like the suburban area of Chicago.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still do. I mean, I started working with a ghost tour company in the suburbs, Elgin, Naperville, Aurora.
Okay.
Um, Now American Ghost Walks has taken the Elgin, oh, not the Elgin, the Naperville and the Aurora tours. A friend of mine runs the Elgin tours, so I do occasionally still do those as a backup to the lady I used to work for. Diane Ladley was the owner of Haunted Hometowns Corporation. She now
Hmm.
works for American Ghost Walks, giving those tours.
Okay.
Um, and I am because I do know the tours. If there's any time that she can't go, or this, if she has to do like a regular tour and there's a private tour out there, I've been her backup. Plus, we also give the tours in the southwest suburbs, the Archer Avenue, the Vanishing Hitchhiking, Resurrection Mary tours. Uh,
Wow.
Given those, and we are bringing back again. We did it. We didn't do it, I think, at all last year, but we're bringing back again our 7 hour all day adventure ghost tour in Lake County, which is the suburbs north of Chicago.
Okay.
I think
Wow,
September.
7 hours. That's cool.
Yeah, 7 hours on the bus. Well, on and off the bus, and usually
Yeah.
there's a restaurant stop for food. Um, it starts at like 10 a.m. and it goes to about 5
Okay.
5:30.
Oh,
So
interesting.
it's an all day excursion. We go to a lot of different locations throughout that region. Very interesting region with a lot of hauntings,
Yeah.
haunted cemeteries. White Cemetery is considered. There's a cemetery in the south suburbs of Chicago called Bachelor's Grove, and White Cemetery is considered like the Bachelor's Grove of the north area. And the street Rainbow Road. There were a lot of hauntings on Rainbow Road, which is very near that cemetery. Again, gangster stuff as a new mayor came into Chicago in the mid 1920s trying to reform the city. A lot of the gangsters moved to the suburbs. There was a place called the Mineola Hotel, which is north in Fox Lake, north of Chicago, which is believed the gangsters were running a lot of stuff out of.
Uh-huh.
Uh, there was actually an incident called the Fox Lake Massacre, which happened a little over a year after the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in the Manning's Hotel, which is a building that still stands today in Fox Lake, where the shooting of five gangsters, including three that died, uh, many believe could have been a retaliatory uh, attack
Oh,
from the St. Valentine's Day
that would
Massacre.
make sense.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a
Well,
very storied region.
oh my gosh, it sounds like it. And it sounds like you're just the guy to tell everybody everything.
Well, I do have an assistant with that tour because it's so long.
Oh, sure. That's good.
A guy named Scott Marcus
Hmm.
who's written a couple of books, and he wrote Voices from the Chicago Grave. He originally
Okay.
grew up in the area, and he in his book he has a lot of Lake County stories. So me and him kind of do the tour together.
Oh, interesting. Oh, very cool. Now, Tony, do you have social media that people can check you out at if they want to follow along on on what you're up to, or
I
or how
do.
can people, yeah, what's your social media?
Well, I mean, under my name, I have Facebook, Tony Szabelski.
Okay.
Um, I also have a page that I run some events off of called Chicagoland Tours and Mysterious Events.
Okay.
Again, it's just on Facebook, and you can look it up that way. Um, I have like we do. I also do some ghost hunts at this spiritual church in
Uh-huh.
Cicero. Um, the building used to be an old funeral home. Uh,
Okay.
at one point. It's connected to a disaster in Chicago, July 24th, 1915, when a boat docked on the Chicago River called the Eastland tipped over before the boat had even left the dock, and it was carrying passengers to a company picnic.
Hmm.
And picnic was in Michigan City, Indiana, the Western Electric Company's annual picnic, and they were located in Cicero, the town where this church is. And 844 people died when that boat tipped over in the river. 22 like whole families were wiped out, and the funeral home that building used to be that funeral home. They actually made so much money off that disaster that they were able to build a newer building and expand on their business.
Oh, wow.
And then the I mentioned gangsters moved to the suburbs when a new mayor came into Chicago in the mid 1920s until they can get their mayor reelected, Big Bill Thompson. Um, and Capone moved his operations out to Cicero. operating not too far away from where this building is, the spiritual church, it on at the Hawthorne Hotel. And they say there were some gangster funerals that took place in that building that we do the
Oh,
ghost
I wouldn't
hunt.
doubt it.
Yeah, that is possible. Capone could have been there.
Yeah.
Yeah. As you can still see some remnants of it being an old funeral home, including the embalming room downstairs.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That'd be an interesting
Mhm.
place to explore.
It is definitely, yeah.
Yeah. Now, how can someone, if they want you as a tour guide specifically, how can they
Mhm.
sign up to have you as their guide?
Well, you would have to talk to the tour company, American Ghost
Okay.
Walks, and ask for me.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right. I'll make sure to put a link of that in the show notes along with
Yeah. Hmm.
how people can find your Facebook page so that they can follow along with what you're up to.
Right. And if it's a bunch of people, like say a decent sized group, you could also request me as a private tour.
Oh, sure. That'd be a really great idea. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of people go to Chicago as a family or what
Right.
have
Yeah.
you. So
Mhm.
that's a really good idea.
Yeah. I also give the Devil in the White City tours, which is about the serial killer H. Holmes.
Uh-huh.
The World's
I was
Fair
going
that
to ask you,
in 1893.
do you, so H. Holmes, there's
Mhm.
speculation that he found, I wanted to ask you that he found some of his victims at the Congress Plaza Hotel. Do you think that's true? Do you think that's just a rumor?
I think for the most part, it might be just a rumor,
Okay.
but the hotel being new at 1893 for the fair,
Yeah.
and one of his he marries three times. H. Holmes, three legal marriages that we know of. He may have had other sham marriages, but he never divorced anybody. One of the ladies that he met, the last wife that we know he had, was Georgiana Yoke. He actually met her at a building which would have been just right near the Congress that still stands today.
Okay.
It's where I forgot the name of it. It's one of the universities. Might be Roosevelt University.
Hmm.
Um, but it was like um, a department store at the time. That's where he met her,
Okay.
and that would be just right near the Congress. It was very possible he would have been there.
Yeah.
Would have gone in there. Unfortunately, the sad truth about H. Holmes is we don't know too much about what he actually did. He used so many aliases,
Right.
and he was never charged with a murder in Chicago. So it's really hard to tell. But it's very possible that he would
Well,
have
and
some for that
there's
hotel.
speculation that he may have been Jack the Ripper.
Yeah, I actually did a tour with his great great grandson a few years back, Jeff Mudgett.
Really? Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
who is the one who did the History Channel episode
Yeah.
called American Ripper.
Yeah, I watched
And
that. Yeah.
yeah, 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 he was in Chicago, and he was doing an event. Jeff Mudgett was at the Congress Hotel, and as part of that event, we went down to Englewood neighborhood, the south side where H. Holmes' building was, which is now the Englewood Post Office.
Uh-huh.
Um, so again, it's possible. Um,
Yeah.
mhm.
I don't know that we'll ever know for sure, but holy
Mhm.
buckets, there's a lot of history in that city.
There is, yeah, definitely. Hmm.
Yeah. Well, Tony, I thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank
I'd like
you.
to talk to you offline, so if you could hang
Mhm.
tight.
Sure.
But thank you so much for coming
Oh, you're
on and
welcome.
answering
Yeah.
my questions and educating us on what I find to be very fascinating.
Hmm.
So thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you.